Welcome to Democratic Television, a program of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party that brings insights, perspectives, and attitudes of our always thoughtful Democratic guests. Today we're joined by Sally Lieber. Sally, thanks for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
I know we've had you on the show in other capacities as a mayor of Mountain View and as an assembly member and fighter for social justice. You've done a lot in your short lifespan, and you've done more interesting things lately. You've been working with refugees that have tried to get out of some pretty dire circumstances.
Yeah, well, this latest project in my life in terms of working with refugees really came about this fall. And I remember taking a coffee break from work and reading some newspapers online, and there was one image that just jumped out at me from virtually every news source, and I'm sure that the viewers have seen this too. And it was a very now famous photo of a little 3-year-old toddler boy whose body washed up on the shores of Turkey. And I really, seeing that photo, I had been thinking about what was going on in Syria. You know, the revolution started and pretty much died there in 2011 as part of the Arab Spring. But this photo jumped out and touched me in a very real way. And I decided that I had to make a commitment at that time to do something about it.
Well, and that's what we're going to talk about. What did you think that you could do as an individual living here in Northern California and Mountain View?
Well, I really started to research who was responding to the refugees, what was going on, where were the gaps, and pretty quickly decided that I could make a difference by going to Greece, where most of the refugees are landing, and pitching in and trying to help in a very frontline way. I think that anytime that we do that, we also have to think about raising money for those worthy causes as well, not spending all the money on traveling to a place to try to help versus helping in an immediate way. But I was lucky in that I realized that I had the frequent flyer miles to get there. It's relatively cheap to stay in Greece, and so I could help tell the story of what's happening. So I think it was just about a couple weeks later that I found myself on a flight to Athens and then on to Lesbos. And Lesbos is one of the Greek islands. It's one that's very close to Turkey. And so many of the refugees are walking from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan even, and walking to Turkey is the closest place to make what's a very perilous sea crossing to get to Greece and get into the EU.
So people are leaving their home countries because of very perilous circumstances, uncertainty, lack of food, shelter, war situations.
Yeah, really the impact of the resurgent Taliban, the impact of ISIS, and sadly in Syria, a civil war that has turned very deadly for civilians and is now backed up on the side of the president and his forces by Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is putting Russian airstrikes in to be a part of this conflict. And so it's a situation that people don't have a choice of whether to leave or not. Certain death is worse than the perils of going on the road and facing many, many dangers and trying to get to a point of safety. I think that as Americans, we're so detached from those kinds of realities that we don't think about the fact that refugees who are trying to escape a dangerous situation under international law do have the right to go to wherever they feel most safe. And I really found out very clearly there that there's much more that the U.S. needs to do to step up in this conflict.
People who leave are, as you say, feeling like they have no other option. do they hear from people that have sort of made it to the promised land and get positive reinforcement, whether it's accurate or not, and that helps fuel their desire?
There's a lot of communication. Almost everyone has a cell phone with them. Many of the refugees are on Facebook or Twitter, and they're comparing notes with other folks and finding out where the most dangerous spots are. It's a very stressful process for them because it takes about a month to walk from Syria to the point in Turkey where they can cross into Greece. And that whole time they're getting information about drownings in that crossing, and also about the perils of being in Turkey. Back in December, the EU and the UN had an agreement with Turkey to give them about $3 billion to care for refugees inside Turkey and not let them proceed on to the rest of Europe. And it's something that I think from the volunteer and advocate perspective is really a scary thing because there have been many abuses. But there are so many refugees who are sharing information. And movingly, there was a boat of refugees recently that was making a very dangerous crossing, lost the motor to their boat. And when some of the Spanish volunteer lifeguards went out to bring the boat in, the refugees were applauding and calling out the names of the lifeguards because they had seen the stories of them saving other refugees on Facebook. And so there's a lot of communication and the opportunity for volunteers to continue to communicate with refugee families and to know what's happening to them as they progress on to Northern Europe.
So you were volunteering pretty much in our winter, or at least a portion of it. What was the weather like for the refugees coming up into Turkey and across to Greece?
Well, I was there in November and December, and there was unseasonably warm weather, thankfully, in November, and almost going into the beginning of December. In December, very heavy rain started, and in December and January, it started snowing there. So you have to imagine refugees that are making a crossing across the Aegean. I would say that 90 to 100% don't know how to swim. They're in very inadequate rubber life rafts that are meant to hold about maybe 14 or 15 people. 50 to 60 people standing up can be in those life rafts.
Oh my God.
And the waves are high when the sea is stormy. It's very easy for water to get into those boats. And so a trip that would take an hour and a half on a legitimate ferry and cost around 20 euros is taking up to 9 hours and costing up to 2,000 euros per person with the traffickers. So it's a very perilous situation that the winter weather has really complicated.
How do people get the money to, that sounds like a lot of money, one person, and you multiply it by the size of anyone's family.
It's an enormous amount of money, and people are selling everything that they have left to get out of their home country. And you see very young males, the 12-year-olds who are posing as 14 and 15-year-olds, or the 14 and 15-year-olds, where an entire extended family has saved up money to get that young man out of the way of ISIS, out of the way of the Taliban. And one of the young men that I talked to there said, "I'm so sorry that I'm coming here thinking that Greece was my home country." And he said, "But the Taliban is shooting all young men, and so I have to leave." So these are people that feel very deeply about their home country, about their families, and they're just forced by the violence that they're subjected to get out.
So there's a lot of sacrifice going on all over.
A tremendous amount of sacrifice, and you see person after person coming with their small plastic shopping bag of all their worldly possessions. the grandmothers who really look like they've never traveled outside of Afghanistan or Syria. But it's amazing the cohesiveness of the families, the commitment to getting the whole family across, and to supporting each other in that way. It's really pretty amazing.
So have people made arrangements with these smugglers or whatever to get across? Have they done that in advance? Do people land on the coast and make deals right then and there, and 15 minutes later they're on a undersized boat with way too many people?
Generally, people are walking to get to that point in Turkey. Then they make connections with the smugglers there, and generally are hiding in the forests waiting to be able to cross. And they can be in a forest with no cover, no services, no tents, no water, no food for a week or more. And then when they get to the point of crossing, we've heard numerous stories about people seeing these life rafts and not wanting to get onto it because they know that it's dangerous. But the traffickers pointing a gun at them and saying, if you don't get on and go now, we shoot you. So it's a situation of real duress. And the conditions inside Turkey are dire. And they're especially dangerous for women and children alone. Who are there, and there are women who are coming alone, and it really strikes fear in the hearts of the volunteers and advocates to know that now with the situation as it's developing, they're being forced to stay longer and longer inside Turkey.
So that's the conditions that people are facing, and then they go across, hopefully. A number of them make it, a number of them don't make it.
Yeah. Sadly, there have been an enormous number of people who have lost their lives in that crossing. And there's a project called the Missing Migrant Project where families can post photos. There are about 30,000 people that are missing on the road from these countries to Northern Europe. And there are about 10,000 children that are missing in that process.
Wow.
So that really suggests trafficking or, the taking of children, the death of children. And it has really been a hard process for the volunteers.
Yeah. Wow. We're going to take a break right now. When we come back, more about Sally Lieber's working to save refugees.
Hi, I'm State Senator Bob Wieckowski, and I enjoy representing each of you in the California State Senate. I've introduced a packet of bills, which we're calling the Economic Equality and Financial Stability Bills. California and the Democratic Party is committed to solving income inequality. These are the values that we have. This packet of bills, when placed into law, will allow people to retain a little more money if their wages are being garnished, if they're faced with bankruptcy, retain some assets, and also have the chance to go into court if they have a faulty judgment against them. These are the values that we have, trying to lift up those who are less fortunate. There are too many children in California that don't have enough to eat, and they're living in poverty. We all need to work together, but I need your help. The Democratic Party needs your help. We need you to come in and help us out. My office is open. Everyone's office in the Democratic Party is open for you. Let's try to fix this problem together. Let's try to help out those who are less fortunate than us. Again, this is Bob Wieckowski, and thank you for helping.
Welcome back to Democratic Television. We're talking with Sally Lieber, a former Mountain View council member and assembly person, but now someone who's doing very different stuff. We were talking about the work you've been doing with refugees who are making the life-saving flight from their home countries, getting over to Greece and then trying to get up to Europe. You've spent time in Greece and the island of Lesbos. Tell me some things that you've seen there with the refugees that help us understand what it's like.
Well, I think when it first hit me was just flying into the island. It's a short flight from Athens, so the plane doesn't get very high. And circling the island, you just see how all of the shoreline that faces Turkey is completely ringed with orange life preservers. And when you realize that each one of those represents a person who's been coming, it's really a profound realization. I got to the airport and was driving through little Greek villages trying to find my way to where I was heading, and got there very late in the afternoon and actually into the evening, and went to my B&B there, had a nice view of the ocean through one of the windows, and so I left the window open and went to sleep with my jet lag. And had a terrible dream that I heard people screaming in the darkness, and woke up suddenly thinking that the dream would go away, and it didn't. And I realized that there were actually people who were landing in a boat screaming right at that moment. And so I was able to jump up, run outside, run down the cobblestone street and out to the beach, and right there at 3 o'clock in the morning was a boat of 60 people who had probably been out on the water terrorized for 8 or 9 hours at that point. There are an enormous number of very young children, babies, toddlers, old people, people with terrible Taliban injuries. You'll see 2 guys carrying their 3rd friend who has no legs, those kinds of things. And just responding to these boats, you can find yourself one of only 2 or 3 people that respond to a boat that way. And trying to get that boat unloaded, trying to get people warmed, wrapping babies in survival blankets, and you just have to kick in and do these things. And it's not a question of, do you know how, or is somebody else going to help you? Everything that's going on there is going on through volunteers that just do. And at the height of the crisis during the months that I was there, we had one day where we had over 50 boats land. And the magnitude of dealing with that many refugees, with the complexities of the illnesses and the injuries that they come with, and the fact that they have a lot of trauma and stress, and they haven't had water, they haven't had food, any of those things is really a lot to do. And that kind of flow in one single day really impacted us mentally, physically, spiritually, psychologically. And by the end of that day at about 3 a.m., we were just really devastated. The next day, boats started to arrive at 6 a.m., and we had over 80 boats land.
Oh my God.
That day. And you think about what the response would be in California, if even in San Francisco, if we had that magnitude of refugees coming, would we be able to have the generosity of spirit and the can-do attitude that the Greek people have in that many refugees landing on their shores?
Well, this is an island that normally got by with tourism and beautiful wide open spaces and all that. And the folks that live there, their lives have been turned around. I would expect that they would be very bitter.
Well, absolutely turned upside down in positive and negative ways. So many of the people who live on Lesbos, in terms of the Greek people who are there, are the descendants of the Greek refugees who were expelled from Turkey in 1915.
Oh.
So they take the attitude that we all come from refugees. And so even the 90-year-old widows in black will be out there trying to pull a boat in and picking up babies. When you have a boat with over 60 toddlers on it, and the boat has been partially submerged, and you're just trying to hand off children as fast as you can, And a lot of times you don't even realize that how physically stressed your body is or how injured you are until a couple days later when the adrenaline stops pumping.
What is it like to be a volunteer there? You give me a sense that you're always on call, you're ready to respond, and yet it doesn't sound like there's a strong sense of organization about it. People just need to do what they do, and that's working to the degree that it is.
I would say that during the time that I was there was little positive help coming from any government, or the NGOs were, I think, outgunned by the flow of things. And what has been effective there are just the 22-year-old volunteers who organize a soup kitchen on their own. So there's an element of it that's a little bit like a pop-up ad hoc kind of a thing, almost looking like Burning Man in some cases, where people are just creating things out of nothing and making it work, and doing it in a very beautiful, generous way, and making art to make it beautiful. Wow. And just trying to add to the refugees' lives in so many different ways.
And we talk about refugees, but you've also talked about families, and you've talked about individuals, and you've mentioned to me that there's a selflessness that's a spirit, maybe a spirituality of we're all in this together and the strong helping the weak.
Yeah, I was, I think, most surprised by the attitudes and behavior of the Muslim men. As an American woman, I think we're kind of raised to think of Muslim men in capital letters as, something potentially threatening. And coming from my own upbringing and perspectives, I can say that I have never seen the partnership that existed between the husbands and wives, the compassion and the absolute patience with getting a grandmother up the hill, with carrying people with no legs on your back. And in these situations, the men were so incredibly selfless, and it was not possible to give any of these men a bottle of water, a knitted hat, a blanket, a sandwich, if you couldn't absolutely convince them that every woman and every child who were there or could possibly be there the next day were not already provided for. So the men will not eat to feed their family, and they'll carry their mother on their back up the mountain, and they're just all going to get there together. So very, very strong families, incredibly inspiring families, incredibly loving people. And you think about, in any flow of 1 million people, are there going to be bad apples? Yes, there will always be bad apples, but I was lucky enough in never finding any of them, and instead finding the refugees that step up and want to help the other refugees. We had refugees coming to us in a situation where they had just gotten out of a boat, and they were trying to help with the situation overall. And so it's a process of not having that strict dichotomy between we're volunteers and we wear the orange vests and you are the people that we provide service to, but letting them help you. And driving some of the refugees around the island, I would drive women who were pregnant, families with very small children, elderly women, injured people, and driving through a sea of the able-bodied men. And each time I drove past them, they would all cheer to see someone who is driving the women and the small children and the babies. And so that was tremendously moving to me.
And you would take people to maybe a prearranged shelter and give them something more than...
To a secondary tent camp, but spare them having to walk up the mountain. Because it takes so long to walk to Turkey that, people have injuries, they have pregnancies, etc.
We don't really think about putting ourselves in harm's way to go to Greece as you did. What if somebody wanted to do that? Is that a positive thing, a good thing, a good use of someone's time?
Well, again, there's the balancing act. How much should you stay in the U.S. and raise money from your friends and family, and how much should you go there and volunteer in person? I think that going to these places and volunteering in person can help you raise even more money for food aid, for those kinds of things than you would have gotten if you had stayed home and just asked. There's something very real about having someone that you know there. And I think one of the great places to do the research on day-to-day what's going on is on Facebook. There are groups like Lesvos Volunteers, Better Days for Moria, which is the very large refugee camp. And just searching on that, you come up with opportunities all across Europe to really help, because there are refugees who are stuck in Athens and all throughout Europe who are spending a very cold winter outside.
Let me ask you this. Do you have a reference? Do you have a website that you could recommend that people could go to?
Yeah, I'm going to be putting out on my website, sallylieber.org, a list of the projects that I hope that people will follow on Facebook and consider giving to. There are a lot of very small, nimble efforts to help that are not the big ocean liner NGOs that are hard to move, but the smaller NGOs that may be just a few people, where you can give money and you can actually say what you want it to go to and how you want to be involved. I think that's a great place to start.
We have about 20 seconds left. Do you have any final takeaway from all this?
Well, you know, I think the great gift that the refugees are giving us is the opportunity to deal with migration, something that we haven't thought through and that we have to think through, with the impact on politics of global warming and environmental degradation. There's going to be so much more to come, and also to develop our compassionate infrastructure.
Great. Thank you, Sally, very much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for watching Democratic Television. Give us a call at 408-445-9500. Visit our website, sccdp.org, and like Sally, help make a difference.